Greetings, Duelists, and welcome to another video. As most people already know, we have had our second YCS of the season being concluded this weekend, which was YCS Vancouver. As opposed to the first YCS that we had last week in Sao Paulo, Brazil, this event was not a team YCS and had a little bit more representation. I think in order to aid the prospect of what was expected from Vancouver, it's very important that we analyze what happened with the first YCS. Because it not only does it serve as a good prelude for what was happening in the current format, shaping up, but as well as give players like a general basis of what was to expect for future YCS events like this one. So last week during Sao Paulo, we saw that Kashtira was still a dominant force in the TCG despite the massive changes with Doom's release. The deck stood its ground and secured the most amount of top spots in top 16 between all the players in the current team. However, by the time we reached top 8, most of those Kashtiras were eliminated, and Unchained took the spot as the most represented deck in Top Cut, and eventually secured multiple spots like in top 4, and even having one of the players win in the team were in at their event. So if we can go to say something about Brazil is that Unchained proved to be a very strong force in the meta game, and then now it fared the question for people before the next event is that was this a one-trick pony, or was Unchained a real actual contender and should have been very heavily cited or prepared for in the next format or the next event. Now we move over to Vancouver, and we can see that there is something very different here. If you take a good look, it looks like Unchained not only demonstrated its position in the format, but it pretty much dominated the event. Having 9 spots in top 32 kind of tells you already how strong Unchained was, but that's not even the most polarizing part. The most polarizing part is if you look at top 4, 75% of them were Unchained, and eventually it goes without saying, it won the entire event. Congratulations to Jesse. I think this is his 5th YCS now. With this strategy being involved. So now we're going to bear the following questions: did people actually prepare for this matchup? Was this deck underestimated and not cited well for it? Did people avert their focus on Unchained because of the fear of other decks? I'm going to do my best to cover everything and more. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the Unchained lists, at least a couple of them. This is Jesse Cotton's list. If you see this list and you compare it to the list he showed last week, the real big significance is that Nibiru is now in the main deck. And you can make the argument that Nibiru is not the most effective hand trap this format. However, if you are facing a deck like Unchained, this deck doesn't have many blowouts against it, so Nibiru is a really good card just for trying to handle the matchup to some extent. Another really interesting thing that we can take from here is that he's playing the Unwailing. This is basically just another Unchained card, just to give you more variety into your options whenever you're setting cards or popping cards. And it does have another utility effect, which is cool against floodgates or other as another interruption. So let's look at other lists before we go talking about for example the side deck. we see the second place list is pretty much almost standard. The big difference from here is that he is playing Fenrir. And you'll notice with the third place list, he's also the third place player also did the same thing. We're going to see like this being a common trend amongst like all like probably other Unchained lists. Like here's another one from Patrick Hoven. So going back to Fenrir, I think Fenrir was a really good choice because when it comes to like dealing with Unchained or dealing with cards in the meta, non-destructive removal is very crucial. So if your deck can afford to play Fenrir in their deck, in the strategy, is just going to help you more than not. But yeah, like that's one thing to take into consideration. Is something that is surprising is Jesse did not play anti-spell on his side deck, but many other Unchained players did. And I feel like if you are playing Unchained, this card it just feels like a cheat code. It's like if you go first with Unchained and you resolve this card, unless they do something like evenly you, like this card is really strong and it pretty much like helps secure your end board. We've already seen in the past when cards like this or Eradicator or Imperial Order, just to name a few examples, like cards that are heavily targeted against spell cards are just being played and just being answered. Like not many decks can like play against that. Like Jesse's list is already playing a lot of spell cards. Same thing with the other two Unchained list. The Purely deck, piloted by Chris LeBlanc, has a plethora of spell cards, pretty much like 2/3 of their deck. So just having anti-spell in your side deck is just a really smart move. Like if we go to like Infernoble or like probably Dragons, I'll talk about Dragons in a second. Like a lot of decks are just playing many spell cards, so just having anti-spell is just something that you kind of have to consider when it comes to a format like this one, especially in a deck like Unchained. Herald of the Abyss. Some people were maining it, some people were citing it. Like the second place player was maining it. I think this is a really strong choice because again, it's non-destructive removal, which is already good against Unchained. This also overlaps for Purely as well as Kashtira, because this can specifically get rid of unaffected monsters, as where other boards forms of removal cannot. So honestly, if you're playing Thrust in your deck, this card should be in your main or your side deck. And players who actually did that, like, were doing very successful. So I guess the last thing I'll talk about involving Unchained, at least, is the choice Jesse made. Jesse chose to play Marionette Might in the side deck. For those who don't know, what this card does is that you pitch it from your hand, you target a fiend or a zombie on your opponent's board, and you take control of it. So with 3 of these, plus the Change of Heart, plus triple tactic talents, makes it like he has a total of like 5 to 8 cards that actually shift control to your opponent. And that's really strong. When it comes to the Unchained matchup, just taking control of their High King Wave Caesar is like really strong. Like taking control of their Soul of Rage and just using their effects that can benefit you in the mirror match. If they try to Griffin lock you, you can not only break the Griffin lock, but lock out your opponent specifically if you like take their monster. So I think Marionette Might is just like one of those cards you kind of have to highly consider if Unchained actually gets more and more popular in the as a deck moving forward. So yeah, So the second thing I want to cover here is the performance of dragons. As you can see here in the top chart, Dragon Link had 6 top 32 spots, being the second most represented deck in Top Cut. I think one of the main reasons for this is because Kashtira is fading themselves out of the format, and Kashtira was really just like the biggest pressure for this deck. Outside of that, like, I think I think that Dragons is just like a really strong pick. Like, as you guys already know, this deck won the World Championships, and in an environment like the World Championship, which is very different from the TCG format, that deck has become a really strong pick. But with Kashtira being dwindled here in the TCG, this deck is just as effective. And one thing to take away from it is the fact that they played Bestials. Like, I think any deck that plays Bestials is going to do very well this format. And Dragons is just a strategy that can just abuse Bestials more than any other strategy in the game at the moment. So, like, yeah. So now that we're talking about Bestials, I kind of want to bring up something. So back in a few days ago, I did a video talking about Skullmeister and regarding the details. Well, why that card could be really good in the format. One common argument that was brought up against me is Bestials being a better choice. And at first I was reluctant to believe that, because I felt like Skullmeister just covered a lot more ground against a couple more decks. However, I am going to respect Bestials to some extent, especially Bestial Druisworm. So if you see here, we're going to see that Jesse played specifically Bestial Druisworm and not Magnumwood. And if we look at Crystal Blanc, the Purely deck, he did the exact same thing. Like, he played Druisworm. And you're probably thinking, why Druisworm over Magnumwood? Or, like, what value does Druisworm hold specifically as a Bestial? The number one reason why this card was being experimented upon is because it was predicated to be a really strong choice against Unchained, because not only did it get rid of the Soul King Yama in the graveyard, but this also served as non-destructive removal. Like, and this goes back to what I was saying about Unchained. Like, if you have non-destruction removal in your deck as an option, you should really consider it, because that is very important in the matchup. And Bestial Druisworm is just a really good candidate for that. If you noticed, none of the Dragon players that made Top Cut made it to top 8. And I think one of the main reasons for that was because other people were on Bestials. Other people being on Bestials means that it gives them an edge to actually combat the Dragon deck, while also overlapping for Unchained. So now that I mentioned that, let's talk about a few other decks. If we see here in the Top Cut, we see that Purely, Kashtira, Flow Under Ease, and we have a few other outliers like Sprite and Rescue Ace, and Labyrinth and Branded Chimera. They all made Top Cut. So I kind of want to start with Chimera for a small hot minute. If you guys already know, I brought up how Chimera was slowly adapting and gaining ground this format, and it's a deck that you really have to be careful when facing. I don't think this deck got power crept at all. I think the two culprits that are to blame is, like, one, the Unchained matchup is very unfavorable for them. Especially if you're not playing like the branded portion of the deck, the matchup is just really really hard. It's almost unwinnable because their resources trade well into your resources. Their Unchained is just a lot more resilient, and everything you do with the Chimera strategy does not involve actual removal. That is non-destructive or non-targeting. That's where the branded portion comes in. And it's just really really tough to break through the board. Another catalyst to why Chimera did not do as well is how popular the Bestials were. Chimera is pretty much like in the same boat as a deck like Tier Elements, or another deck that could be like graveyard heavy. If we see stuff like Bestials and we see like a lot of graveyard hate, like for example, we can take the Infernoble list that was playing DD Crow. We can take the Labyrinth deck that was playing like the Ichizus as well as the Bestials. Like if we take Rescue Ace, you have a bunch of Bestials in the side deck. Also, the like Unchained Chimera is very weak to Ash Blossom, so just Ash Blossom being predicated in a lot of decks is also a problem for like Chimera. I'd say you still have to respect Chimera as a deck. Like the moment the format is well positioned for Chimera, you're going to see that deck again because that deck really does a lot of unfair things. And post Age of Overlord, that deck is just going to become a lot stronger. So I kind of want to talk about Rescue Ace for a little bit. This is Jack Rory's list. For those who don't know who Jack Rory is, he is our current Master Duel champion. He got paired with Joshua Smith and Emre, and he's like one of the teammates. So for him to pick a deck like this one, as opposed to like other strong picks like Unchained, is very very unorthodox. It is a very very interesting choice because I strongly believe that Rescue Ace, as of right now, is not very very strong in the format. However, 1 month from now, when Age of Overlord debuts, I think this deck will become a lot stronger and a lot more respectable. I will probably make a separate video talking about like Rescue Ace and their position in the format as a whole at the moment. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring up that. So let's talk about Labyrinth. Labyrinth didn't have a lot of representation. However, this is just another deck that you shouldn't be caught off guard, because if there's one thing that makes this deck very very like strong, is the fact that they can play Floodgates and they can play blowout cards. We're talking about stuff like Dimensional Barrier, Eradicator, Full Force Virus. Like this deck can also play Floodgates even though this list didn't have any. Like stuff like Skill Drain, stuff like Gozen, Rivalry. Like if you don't respect Labyrinth, or at least have proper knowledge of them, this is just another deck that's just going to like steamroll and take an event by storm. Also, this deck is also getting support post Age of Overlord as well, so that's another thing to look out for. As we can see, this list, they're playing the Unchained small package. I did a player interview regarding this deck, so if you're curious, I do have it on the channel. Feel free to check it out. It was around the time Dune got released. I think this is a very very strong way to play this deck. I think in order for Labyrinth to keep up, they kind of have to do unorthodox things, and the Unchained engine, just playing like a small package of them, it does help with their resiliency. We also see Tackle Crusader in the main deck, which is a really cool choice. Is one of those odd choices that kind of helps you if you do proper deck building, because it does well against Kashtira. It does well against like other strategy. If your opponent summons a floodgate monster on you, you can just like dump a furniture with the Tackle Crusader and just book it. So I'd say this is a really cool choice on their end. Let's talk about Infernoble. So this deck pretty much fell off at the very beginning of the format. In a format where draw and a few other common counters, like very specific board breakers or blowout cards, like existed, this deck kind of struggled a bit. Also, the Unchained matchup is not really favorable for this strategy either. However, it does not mean it cannot compete well in under this environment. If this deck goes first and they resolve Neospace Connector, like it really feels scary, like be on the other end, because the ceiling of this deck is kind of high, and it can dish out a fair number of interruptions. And they're playing a good amount of non-engine, like to sustain like their win condition as well. One glaring issue I do have with Infernoble is that it is a glass cannon deck. It's kind of a deck that kind of throws all their eggs in one basket, and if you kind of fight through their entire board, it's really hard for them to bounce back. As we already brought up earlier, they play in DD Crow in the side. I'm playing DD Crow in my Vanquish Soul list, so this is something I actually can vouch for. Not only is it good against like certain matchups where the base deals are also good, but this also covers Purely, which not many decks have an answer to Purely. So I kind of want to talk about Purely for half a minute. So the thing to take the most out of Purely is the number one, I strongly believe the number one reason we don't see Purely as represented as other decks, like for example Dragons, it's because people already have a dedicated main deck, like non-engine slots in their deck building, and those like engine cards that they're playing in their deck kind of like really fault Purely, which is one of the reasons you see like Crossout in the main deck. Chris pretty much thought like Purely is really strong if the non-engine cards are not an issue for them. So playing something like Crossout that just handles all the cards that could blow out Purely is really strong. As you can see in the side deck, they have Dimensional Barrier, which is another Crossout target. They're playing Books and Imperms and Ash and Nib, which are all cards that Nib doesn't really hurt Purely that much, but there are moments and positions where this card could be effective. So just having that as a Crossout target is also strong. But yeah, I think I pretty much covered almost everything. Like I don't think I need to like bring up like Sprite. If you really want to know why Sprite is doing well, just go check Dinkan Fam's channel. He is a very dedicated Sprite player. This is a going second Sprite build that just OTKs you. Let's see what else. I don't think I need to talk about Flonderies. Flonderies is pretty much the same as always. It's just one of those decks that can squeeze into a format because of how oppressive the deck itself can be, and in an environment where you don't get drolled or you don't get hand trapped or you don't get flooded or like stuff like that, I think Flunder is just going to do well. Like it's another that can play Shifter, and Shifter is really strong this format. So not much to bring up when it comes to stuff like that. But yeah, with this being our second YCS, I feel we can reach a general consensus that Unchained is pretty much one of the more dominant decks. The deck just has a lot of resiliency, a lot of interruptions. There are no real blowouts that exist against this deck. If the pilot knows what they're doing. Jesse Cotton already brought up that when it came to Unchained, he tries to ensure that like he always has follow up and he always has like a way to play as safe as possible with the deck. So it kind of goes to show you how well rewarded he was by just playing around all many cards. Um, last week we saw him try to do the same thing, but Pac pretty much won like the mirror match because he just drew the actual good blowout cards that specifically could aim at Jesse. That's nothing to take against Pac. Pac is a tremendous player. Like he deserved his YCS win, but sometimes like it's very important to bring up like these type of discussions because when it comes to this format, you really have to know what you're doing. This is not a format where the deck can just carry you to victory. This is a format where not only can you just play a deck that's really strong for the format, but you also have to be very knowledgeable. Like 1 month ago, nobody was predicating on Unchained being as strong as it was represented like this past weekend, and I don't think we're in a format where like Unchained is like the definitive best deck and nothing else can defeat it. I think we're in a format where if people keep playing and citing for like the other decks of the format, Unchained is going to always try to succeed because Unchained is a deck that really needs a lot of attention in order to like be predicated towards it. We've already seen scenarios like this in the past. We've seen it with Manadium, we've seen it with Branded, we've seen it with Super Heavy Samurai back when they were popular before the ban list, the June one. So citing and preparing for every viable strategy, it's outright impossible. However, a proper balancing act and proper knowledge of what all the decks do is going to reward you if you keep playing this format. So before I end the video, I kind of want to talk about one particular card. I don't think many people know about this card. I don't think this card is on many people's radar because it wasn't on any player's side deck, at least that I can see or I can remember. And I feel like if you're going to play in a format like this one or play in an event like this one, I think this card is very important to bring up. And the card I'm talking about is Gravekeeper's Inscription. So for those who don't know, this card came out in Photon Hypernova. It's right now at $10, and pretty much what the card reads is neither player can activate card effects in the graveyard, neither player can banish cards from the graveyard, or neither player can special summon monsters from the graveyard. You pick one of these three effects and you activate it in as your first activation in the main phase. Against Unchained, this card is really good. Not only does it overlap with Unchained, but it also overlaps with dragons. It overlaps with like other graveyard centric strategies. I'm not saying like this is like the definitive best answer for the format. However, like in a format that we have like this one, you kind of always try to look for cards that have the most benefit and can overlap with many matchups, and this is just a really good example of that. I wouldn't be surprised if on our next YCS, which is YCS Cancun, we're going to see people actually playing stuff like this. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me. I hope you found this video very informative. I hope you found this to your understanding. It is a very lengthy video, but I kind of wanted to cover a lot of things regarding the format. And I didn't necessarily cover everything. Like for example, I haven't spoken about Manadium yet. I'll probably do separate videos talking about other things that we could look forward to when it comes to like the YCS and what happened this weekend. But I kind of wanted to talk about the more important stuff because this format is super diverse, and like if you're not prepared for it, stuff like this is just going to keep happening. Um, like it's very soon to tell if Unchained is like the definitive like dominant force that is just really unstoppable and not every deck can beat. However, this deck does not have the highest ceiling. This deck does have a few answers to it. This deck does fold to a couple of cards. Like an unexperienced Unchained player is just going to lose to Nib if they nib you. That's just to give you an example. If you go second against a deck that can summon something like a Beast Dweller, or just activate Dimension Shifter on you, or just summons a Rise Heart, and you don't have like the books or the proper cards, non-engine wise, to handle those cards, you're not going to win with your Unchained deck. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you understood everything. I hope this was to your liking. Keep practicing and keep dueling.